this question gets at the heart of the pedagogy that we might be using in the environments where we're helping students integrate, synthesize across the disciplines. And so this question asks, how do you address the fear that a traditional department or major may have when it's asked to change its practice of teaching and learning? So this gets to the heart of much of what Project Kaleidoscope and many in the room have been talking about for decades now. How do we teach in more engaging ways? But a department that's really grounded in a kind of lecture-based, primarily lecture-based approach, how do you do that in the context of talking about these interdisciplinary, problem-based, even out into the community-based kinds of work? So who wants to take a stab at that?
I have to say that if you haven't read Mark Prinsky's work on digital natives and digital immigrants, that you put that in your reading list, because he talks about most of us in this room, even though we have our Blackberries, our laptops, and we're using digital phones, we still are immigrants. We still need a piece of paper. And the group that we're teaching now have always known instant popcorn, microwaves, cell phones. So they're digitally connected. And the way you deliver content now, since you're a YouTube away from being discovered, that we need to really think about how we package and deliver the learning. They are not going to process it in the same, even though they have the same brain cells, but they're wired differently. So I think that's something that we instituted right away. We immediately put up a Facebook presence, and we immediately began to use things like Uvu, which is the next Skype out there, to communicate and have online tutoring sessions. Those are the kinds of things that we have to help our colleagues see, that if they're not on the drop or ready to retire list, that they have to begin to think about the digital natives that have entered our institutions and how we deliver that content to them.
How did you help those faculty, though, that might have been a little afraid of the technology?
Just teaching them how to use their email.
Start baby steps. Other comments about how this kind of, how do we get over this hurdle?
You need to support the early adopters. You need to identify who's actually trying to do these things in their classroom. Because once, and I just think back, and it's not that long ago, but people started using Blackboard, and I was not an early adopter. But the rest of a couple faculty in the department did. And what ended up happening is a student started coming to my class saying, "You've got to do this, Professor Roth." And that was what switched me. It wasn't that the early adopters switched me, but the change of culture that they created in the students. Because faculty respond to students. If the students are really saying, "This helps us," faculty listen.
So maybe it seems like in every department and all over campus, there are pockets of innovators. Even in the more traditional departments, there are going to be faculty who are ready to break out. And so finding them, supporting them, and bringing together a critical mass of them on the campus. And I've heard somebody say about a third is a good critical mass. So if you can get about a quarter to a third of the folks in the department working together, and then I think you're right, students will follow. So here's another question from the audience. Students that study science in elementary school go disciplinary in high school, so biology, chemistry, physics, and are likely back to science in the interdisciplinary way in graduate school if they go that far. What's the best time to get students involved with interdisciplinary science along this trajectory? Any thoughts? This is actually a really big debate in the interdisciplinary community. Do you have to be a disciplinarian before you can be an interdisciplinarian? Can you just be an interdisciplinarian the whole time of your learning? Is it dependent on the actual learner? What do we do in college? How do we address that particular cognitive development issue? Who wants to take a stab at that one? Mary has a possibility. All right.
Create lots of paths for your students, because students are going to be different. And they are going to come at it from different points of view, and they're going to be ready or not ready. But if you don't have self-designed majors or interdisciplinary majors and other ways that they can do it, they'll get stuck themselves, or they may leave and try to find it somewhere else. I think if your institution doesn't have a lot of potential paths that support both faculty and students in doing this, you're going to get left behind.
Other perspectives from the panel? Tough question. We might have to turn it over to the audience here. Do you all, in the programs that you have on your campuses, maybe I can approach it this way, what kinds of programmatic structures have you set up? Some campuses start, they save the interdisciplinary to a capstone experience, or there's an integrative sophomore course, or maybe you can share from your campuses about the structures and maybe how you think that might influence this or address this question.
Yeah, well,
Scott?
Certainly one of the structures that many of our campuses have, Tom already mentioned, which is the development, for example, of environmental programs that certainly are project-based areas. And Beloit's campus, we have a relatively new but very thriving health and society program that's driven out of our biology department. So it's got a healthy dose of science, but not unlike Jim's talk last night, connects to the social sciences in an interesting way, where lots of campuses are introducing food-based programs that connects to it. And these are things that, at least at the college level, it doesn't really address the question about where's the best place. But at the college level, you're connecting to students' lives in such fundamental ways that there's an immediate demand for these areas.
Maybe another way to think about this question is the difference between multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. So many programs we've found as we've been working in this project might call themselves interdisciplinary, but they're really a Chinese menu or a buffet of courses from across the disciplines. So they may be more really multidisciplinary as opposed to interdisciplinary. And I don't know if you might offer some comments about that, and then thinking about, well, how do we get students into that kind of intentional place of interdisciplinary and integrative thinking?
I'm going to back up a little bit, actually, the previous question, and it kind of blends into this one. In the program we developed at Lafayette, one of the things we intentionally did was to think about how students and faculty could enter the program at any time. It starts at, we once had a metaphor of these columns. We didn't want to offend our silos on campus. We weren't ready to face that. So we left the columns in place, but we created a foundation, an intro course that was problem-based learning, that was interdisciplinary, that faced a real problem that was current, so that students would have a place to come in if they wanted to at that level, freshman level, sophomore level. Then in the middle, we create a lot of conversations across departments with faculty and students and seminars that allowed us to do that. And then the capstone. But one of the things we very intentionally did was to say, if someone decides they're a senior and they want to join the capstone, we want them to. We don't want them to say, well, you didn't have the base level freshman course and you haven't been participating in the seminars and therefore you can't do the capstone. You said that's not what we want. We want to be reaching out and having a structure that allows students to realize they can come in and that people do come into these things at any time.
And Terry, you have bridge programs that start with the freshmen and Bernadette's first year program. So maybe you can address how students do in those integrative environments, what you think.
Well, I wish we really don't have enough data to assess really the success of this yet. And the students, what has been anecdotal is the students who've done the bridge program, have gone through a year, came back and we had them serve somewhat as peer mentors for the next year's class. And it's amazing how often they are telling the other students, the first year ones, hey, pay attention, this matters, and so, as I say, it'll show up. And I really agree with the idea that there's not we really have to offer our students multiple paths. And I'll say something that I've done personally with my graduate students, because in fact I find many of my graduate students come with a very, very focused perspective. Obviously they want to do chemistry, they're excited about it, I'm glad. But I spent 9 years in industry before I came to the university, and you won't succeed in an industrial setting if you can't collaborate and think outside the box a little bit. That's a bottom line thing. So for every one of my PhD students, I've required them to do at least one collaborative project as part of their dissertation. Fortunately, I do a lot of collaborative research. And in fact, right now I have 5 graduate students, all of whom I am a co-advisor with one other colleague from across campus, biology, physics, engineering. And our group meetings are just off the wall. You know, we're talking about making mutants one week and doing material science the next. And so some of that is just helping my graduate students understand this perspective. And, you know, most of these students have come in with a very, very narrow perspective. But on the other hand, I'm finding I get lots of students who find that exciting because it's been something that has been missing. So there are a variety of ways in which we can begin the process of helping our students and future faculty to begin to see the importance of these connections and integrating them. On their curriculum, I have to point out one thing that we're converting from quarters to semesters, and that's actually my new role. I'm responsible for all of arts and sciences. So everybody's dream job, as I say. In our old general education, we had to revamp our general education with much help from AAC and U documents, and is the fact that previously our BA students were required to take a capstone course. Our BS students were not, which was something. So we've actually modified that, and so everyone has to take a cross-disciplinary type of seminar. And then that's another way for us to do that, but that's just kind of an aside.
Okay, Bernadette, maybe you can talk about your students and their ability to deal with these integrative problems, and then we'll move to the next question.
Well, it's interesting because at Florida A&M, it's a historically black college and university. Every major, no matter where you come from and you come to Florida A&M, because it's a HBCU, everyone has to take African American history. So, of course, people always look for ways to opt out, you know, and because it involves a lot of writing, especially in English language arts, and then there are, for a number of reasons. So that was one of our first targets, and that's why we started the book club and started them reading things that would help inform them as they moved along. But I agree, we have to have multiple pathways. So what we did was establish a learning community with linked courses, so that the cross-discipline, so a typical freshman schedule may have humanities, science, math, and maybe one other the elective, where whoever those professors were, we brought them together, offered them an incentive, you know, maybe a teaching assistant or something of that nature, to come up with one project that they all could agree that they would look at it from their viewpoint. So they thought they were doing it for the students, but we actually were doing it for them, you know, because, you know, no one wants to give up their silo, but you don't mind coming out and visiting, but you want to go back home eventually. So establishing this kind of faculty learning community in an effort to help students was really how we helped the faculty begin to think interdisciplinary in nature. We do have an Environmental Sciences Institute. Our recent director was just confirmed at the U.S. government in NOAA for Assistant Secretary in NOAA. But here's the point, that is a Chinese menu. Even though it's supposed to be interdisciplinary in nature, you know, they still had the biologists, they still had the policymakers, they still had the chemists within environmental, and everybody's discipline was important, and not cross-fertilization was occurring. But because of this project where we have these town hall meetings, we invite people to come in and we ask how they collaborate. We've asked faculty to come up with this project. Now we see a synergy of people now getting involved. Like I said earlier, our book club idea has now moved into our assessment of the QEP as part of it.